Do you remember that K-drama from mid-2022 about an autistic lawyer called Extraordinary Attorney Ooh? Well, I've been thinking about it. I've been thinking about it so much that I rewatched it and I developed a special interest in dolphins and whales. I'm joking about the second part. These are my sons, but I did rewatch it and I have been thinking about it. I don't think I'm ever going to grow out of appreciation for small plastic animals. Here's a humpback whale. Woo, I'm dropping whales. But since watching it, I've been thinking about it even more, and I've been playing a bit of spot the difference in my mind, really, because Extraordinary Attorney Ooh was well received. But why? The main character, autistic rookie lawyer Woo Young Ooh, is played by a non-autistic actor. The last time an autistic woman was played by a non-autistic actor, it didn't go down very well within the community at all. See this video here. I'm looking at you, Sia. Although Woo Young Ooh has a very different presentation to music and is lower support needs, she's still a relatively low-masking autistic woman with a lot of distinctive mannerisms and obvious stimming. But there was still that potential here for this portrayal to feel like mockery. And that's how so many people felt about Maddie Ziegler's performance in music. Plus, Extraordinary Attorney Ooh does fall into that the good doctor, Sheldon Cooper, autistic genius or savant thing. Woo Young Ooh didn't speak until she was 5 years old when she screamed the large passages of text she'd memorized from her dad's thick law book. Sounds pretty genius to me. I don't know about you, but when I was 5 years old, I could name a few different types of snake, and my parents were really proud of me for that. And Extraordinary Attorney Ooh even uses cutesy music. I've criticized the autistic reality dating show Love on the Spectrum for doing the same thing. So why are we and were we so okay with this show as a community? Are autistic people, as this article from Polygon suggests, so desperate for representation that we'll just take anything that isn't overtly super offensive? It's no wonder that Extraordinary Attorney Ooh has found an audience among the disabled community. When we're so used to being chronically underrepresented, it sometimes feels like, as a community, we're ready to accept any relatable moments in film and television. So what do you think of that? Do you agree personally? I've been thinking about whether or not I agree with that. And why does Extraordinary Attorney Ooh have an 8.6 rating on IMDb to music's 3.2, despite the fact that they maybe do have several things in common? Or do they? Let's talk about it. And I also want to touch on whether or not there'll be a season 2, because wasn't that supposed to be here by now? There won't be any spoilers, or I'll warn you if there are going to be any spoilers. But I mean, this has been out for almost 3 years now. If you haven't watched it yet, it's your own fault. No, I'm joking. I'm sure you've been very busy. But before we discuss that, today's video is in partnership with Wild. Wild are a vegan and cruelty-free refillable deodorant brand. I've been using them for over 2 years now myself. Now, Wild is known for offering reusable cases that are so lovely you'll want to hold on to them forever, and their latest one is no exception. My shirt and earrings might give you a few clues. They've brought out this heart case in 2 colors. We have cream with red hearts, and then they've also done a white with black hearts. The same design as this lip balm. It's giving Alice in Wonderland. Has a single-use deodorant bottle ever looked this good? I don't think so. I don't think so. And as you can see, there's a little Meg there. The cases can be personalized. Wild's cases are aluminium, so super durable. And it's a great way to reduce your single-use plastic because you just order these little refills and they're in compostable packaging. They're always bringing out new limited edition scents, which I love to try. If you want unscented, they do that as well if that's more your thing. But their latest scent is Love Potion. It's described very accurately in my mind as juicy strawberries, fresh cream, and a hint of champagne. If you're a fan of super sweet smells like I am, I think you'll probably love this one. Wild also offers refillable lip balms, refillable shower gels, so if you want to get everything to match, you can do, or if you want to get something in each of the different colors, then you can do that as well. I've been using the refillable lip balms from Wild for about 6 months now, and it's great for me because I start applying it as a stem. I would have gone through so many plastic tubes by now if it wasn't for Wild. Wild ships worldwide, so you can order wherever you are. They also have a flexible subscription option, so if you like, you can have your refills delivered without ever having to think about it. If you'd like to give it a try, maybe get the new heart case or the Love Potion scent while they're in stock. You can get 20% off anything on the Wild website with my code MEG2025. You can click the link in the description or scan the QR code on screen. As I say, the code applies to anything on the Wild website, but for a limited time only. Thank you very much, Wild. back to the video. Shall I do a different like whale for each option? Maybe instead of having like fancy titles or graphics come up on screen for this video, I'll just like dyspraxically swim a whale across the screen. Yay, there he is. So me and this plastic orca, we think the first reason that Extraordinary Attorney Wu is so well received is that Woo Young-woo is the true main character as promised by the title of the show. Yay! Finally! It's been a long time coming! So we're often sold the dream of an eponymous autistic main character, and instead of getting a show about that eponymous character, or getting a show about the autistic character who was centered in the trailer at least, we get a show about how their autistic traits affect the people around them. I'm sure you can probably already think of a few examples of this. I think Atypical is a good example. The writers give Sam's mom and sister an awful lot of attention, and I imagine a lot of people found them more sympathetic than Sam, who is supposed to be the autistic main character. This is unfortunately more recently a criticism that I've had for Channel 4's new show about an autistic character, Patience. Again, the name of the show is Patience. The autistic character is called Patience. Is the show about patience? I didn't really think so. I've actually just posted a not so positive review of Patience over on my Patreon as an exclusive video this month. It's very in-depth. I think it's 40 or 50 minutes. At the point of recording, I've not quite finished it yet, but a lot of effort has gone into it. I don't think that that would be a question that somebody would be asked. Are you diagnosed or self-diagnosed?
Are you diagnosed autistic or self-diagnosed maybe? Or
Fake disorder cringe coming alive. The autism support group, no. I will leave a link below if you would like to check that out. No pressure to join as always, but that's there. But same with Sia's movie music. It's called music after the autistic character. Yes, Sia did name a character Music, and yet her older sister, who is called Zoo, takes the spotlight. The film is about Zoo's character development as a full-time carer for music. It should have been called Zoo. Zoo the musical. Zoozical, if you will. I think this so often creates an unfortunate distance between the viewer and the autistic character's experience. And the writer of Extraordinary Attorney Wu set out to do the opposite. Moon Ji-won said, "Normally for a story that features an autistic person, many creators would set the narrative to be from a non-autistic person and depict the autism spectrum from that person's perspective. I wanted to put Woo Young-woo as the sole lead of the series and let viewers resonate with her directly without having any mediator in between." And it's really nice to hear that from her, from a non-autistic writer. Unlike Patience or Music, to me, Woo Young-woo feels like a true main character. I think they succeeded there. She's not simply used as a prop to quickly win every trial with no hiccups. Sometimes she gasps, gets things wrong, or she lets her own bias or empathy cloud her judgment and she makes mistakes, like a real human being would. She's not simply the useful robot with the photographic memory. I don't think anybody can relate to or wants to root for somebody who's always right, which was another big issue I had personally with Patience. And Woo Young-woo does not simply exist to inspire her fellow lawyers to do better or to be better. Her own character arc is central to the plot and importantly doesn't conclude with her becoming any less autistic. At the end of episode 16, she's still distinctively Woo Young-woo, but just Woo Young-woo with more life experience. Now, it's true that throughout the season, we do also touch on her dad's perspective. He raised her as a single father in a country where being autistic and disabled is heavily stigmatized, and we'll touch on that stigma a bit later on in the video as well. I liked hearing her dad's point of view. I don't think we want or need to silence the perspective of the neurotypicals around our autistic main character. However, what was refreshing was that her dad's experience never overshadows her own. It actually doesn't take up very much screen time at all. And he's not always presented as right either. For example, in one episode, her dad laments that it can be difficult to live with an autistic person who has attention differences, who often disappears into her own interests and her own world. He recalls this time where as a child she lined up pieces of Lego, I think it was, on the floor, and then he accidentally stands on one and he hurts himself. And he starts to fake cry to kind of attention seek to see if she'll notice that he's in pain, to see if she cares. And she just carries on playing and ignores him. She's just so in her own world and her own zone that she doesn't notice that he's upset, or she doesn't communicate that she's noticed if she has. So his fake crying becomes real tears. It's actually quite a sad scene, and I definitely did feel like I empathized with her father as well. He says in this moment of heightened emotion, "Is that fun for you? What are you planning to become?" Meaning all you do is just line things up, you're never going to amount to anything, essentially, which is obviously an unkind and ableist thing to say. But again, it's a moment of pain and heightened emotion. But it appears ironic to the viewer in the context of the show, because we know that she's gone on to become a lawyer. We can see the person that Woo Young-woo grew into right before our eyes, and we like her. She's presented as a likable character. Basically, we can see very clearly that her dad was wrong in that moment. Now, obviously, even if she hadn't gone on to be successful academically and become a lawyer, what her father said to her would still be wrong. But I think it's a realistic example of how some parents of autistic children can underestimate their children, or see a child completely locked in to hyperfocus and maybe somewhat oblivious to what's going on around them because their attention is so focused in that moment, and wrongly assume that there's nothing going on internally, that it's just a disordered moment and there aren't any thoughts going on in their head. For me personally, as an autistic person, the moments where I look most zoned out and oblivious are probably the moments in which my internal world is the most rich and I'm having lots of thoughts and ideas. And maybe her dad in this moment was assuming, because at this point Woo Young-woo wasn't speaking, assuming that she couldn't hear him, which is sadly probably something that parents do assume of their autistic children sometimes. Overall, their dynamic is just very complicated and nuanced, and I think it's made very clear that they do love each other very much, despite sometimes struggling to communicate. Her dad learned over time that the best way to reach her is through her interests, and luckily they have this shared interest in the law. Basically, we see how much her dad has struggled and worries about her and how the world will receive her, but this is done without the whole show feeling like it's about him and how raising her has affected him. And Woo Young-woo comes off as incredibly likable. Finally, an autistic character that I actually like as an autistic person. This was a real success on the writer's part, in my opinion. She has convictions and strong morals and integrity. For example, as well as the law, she has a special interest in dolphins and whales, and she expresses her dislike for aquariums at multiple points throughout the show. She spends her weekends going to a protest, and in one of my personal favorite episodes, she connects the experience of overworked students in Korea to orcas in captivity with dorsal fin collapse. We follow her thought process to reach that conclusion, and I think it's pretty affecting. She's able to empathize with her weirder clients, or her clients who are somewhat socially outcast. For example, at one point she sticks up for a defendant who's being dismissed as mentally ill. And again, this was intentional. The writers set out to highlight positive autistic traits, including what they called a strong ethical sense. I think she feels even more likable by virtue of the fact that the other characters, most of her colleagues, they really like her, and it feels very believable. Even if they start off exasperated or confused or bemused by certain traits that she has, they grow to understand and respect her. I think some characters start off pitying her, but by the end, I'd say most team members see her as an equal. And when characters are demeaning or discriminatory or try to argue that she's getting unfair special treatment in the workplace, they very much come off as the antagonist. I personally don't feel like Woo Young-woo is used for comic relief throughout the show, and again, characters who do laugh at her are not seen in a good light. That's one complaint I've heard of Atypical, that it can feel like we're supposed to be laughing at Sam. And of course, in The Big Bang Theory, so often Sheldon Cooper's autistic traits are the butt of the joke. Even if the writers won't admit that he's supposed to be autistic, we all know that he's supposed to be autistic. He's like the ultimate caricature. There are funny moments. Sometimes those moments are a result of autistic traits or misunderstandings, but it never feels mean to me. I think it's because we almost always are following Woo Young-woo's point of view. There are some people who disagree with me on that. There's this scene in the first episode that some people don't like, where Woo Young-woo struggles to navigate the revolving door in her new workplace. Personally, as somebody who feels incredibly awkward and aware of my body in a horrible way when I do try and go through revolving doors, IKEA, I'm looking at you. I'm looking at you. I try and avoid them wherever I can. I personally found this scene very relatable. I hate escalators too. I have to make stepping on and off escalators so dramatic. I often have an inner monologue when I'm in revolving doors as well of like, look human, how would a human step into and out of this? I think it just maybe raises my anxiety levels a bit to be in a spinning door. But anyway, as Woo Young-woo struggles to maneuver her way through the revolving doors, they play the dreaded, what the subtitles call playful music, and what some people refer to as like fumbling baby giraffe music, kind of childlike music. And you might say, Meg, didn't you criticize Love on the Spectrum? Didn't you criticize that show for doing just that, for doing the fumbling baby giraffe music? And you would be correct.
It's kind of like clumsy, fumbling baby giraffe sort of music, and they use this throughout the show, you know, when introducing people and during dates as well. If you think, well, that just sounds kind of positive, what's the problem with that? You know, falling in love is cute. I just think when you have autistic people on the show who do have interests in things like Disney and Cartoon Network, there's a risk of viewers not seeing the participants as full adults.
Yes, I did, and I stand by that criticism. I think it was infantilizing and had the effect of making the dates seem more awkward or unnecessarily awkward. What I think the difference is here when we're playing Spot the Difference, personally, I do see a difference between taking people who have a neurodevelopmental condition, putting them in a situation which is challenging, unnatural for them, setting that to quirky music, versus having a light-hearted moment in a kind of rom-com-esque fictional show. Now, if Woo Young-woo were real and this was a documentary and there was a camera crew filming a real autistic person struggling to go through revolving doors, and instead of stepping in to help her, they just filmed her. And if we were going to do what Love on the Spectrum do, they'd also have to film passers-by reacting to this autistic person, looking a bit confused, maybe laughing at her, struggling to get through the doors, setting that to playful music rather than stepping in to help that real life person who actually exists. Yeah, if there was a scene like that in a documentary about autism, I probably would be just as concerned as I was about Love on the Spectrum. But I think if this scene does have the effect of infantilizing Woo Young-woo a little bit, I think this is made up for later in the show. As I say, this is only within the first episode. And I do personally find it very relatable as somebody who has dyspraxia and difficulty with movement, as a lot of autistic people do. Overall, I think the audience are encouraged to root for Woo Young-woo. I don't think anybody watching it is hoping she'll get stuck in more revolving doors just for funsies, you know? I think the audience wants her to succeed. Okay, let's put the orca down. Let's move on. It's really fun stimming with this. If you see me like from now on holding whales in all of my videos, then you can blame K-dramas. Okay, we'll go with Little Dolphin. Little Dolphin for the next point. If you've seen the show, might make sense why I've chosen this one. So another thing I think the audience appreciated was the romance plotline. Well, yeah, there's 4.6 million views on this video of a kiss scene. It has been appreciated many times. And not only was Woo Young-woo allowed to have a romance, she was allowed to have a romance with the neurotypical guy, Lee Jun-ho, who is like a paralegal legal assistant at her law firm. He also wins her heart through her interests, which as an autistic person, I would agree. That is an excellent technique. I mean, that was another criticism I had for the reality show Love on the Spectrum. They so often match autistic people with other autistic people. Sometimes they don't explicitly mention that the date is autistic, but they are. I do worry there's a risk of a slight implication that autistic people should only be with other autistic people, disabled people should only be with other disabled people there. Even in some fictional shows such as The Big Bang Theory and Atypical, the female love interests are a bit eccentric, a bit nerdy, possibly also autistic, who knows? And while yes, often autistic people can't have lovely relationships with other autistic people, we might find it easier to empathize with experiences like meltdowns and shutdowns, things like that. There can be a lot of pros. Autistic people can also have great relationships with neurotypicals too. I managed to catch my very own neurotypical back in 2015. I think sometimes you can balance each other out and it can work really well if you find someone really lovely and supportive like Woo Young-woo's Lee Jun-ho. And just as an aside, as we're comparing to music quite a lot here in this video, Junho's tight hug to support Woo during Overwhelm is just worlds away from Zoo Music's sister jumping on top of her in a public park, pinning her down prone, performing a potentially lethal restraint. Maybe a bit symbolic of the differences between these two pieces of media. I can't think of many times where I've seen a fictional autistic woman have a romance on screen. I guess Quinny and Sasha in Heartbreak High. I mean, to be honest, I just haven't seen that many autistic women represented in film and TV, full stop. So I don't know, maybe we are just desperate for any representation of autistic women having a romance. Some people criticize Junho for being bland and not having very much character development. I think he was just a nice guy. But as this autistic person says, it has been so healing and soft for me as an autistic woman who feels undervalued lately to see a nice guy just love the hell out of her for everything she is. And I really appreciate that he falls for her, not because of her savant skills or because she's a genius or anything like that. I think without the romance plotline, there may have been a risk of falling into a sort of childlike or innocent trope, so I'm glad it was there. Not that asexual and or aromantic autistic people deserve to be infantilized. Not at all. You don't have to have sex or romance to be considered an adult. But also, some autistic people do want to be in relationships, and autistic people and neurotypical people can mix if they want to. The autism is not catching. There are a lot of comments on the kiss scene video about how pure and innocent it was, which does maybe make me a little bit uncomfortable. It's a bit similar to what a not so great character had to say at one point during the show. Actually, if you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. I'm enjoying pointing at you with a dolphin. You're being pecked by my plastic dolphin, I'm sorry. It's a bit patronizing. I'm sure these people mean well. I mean, romance scenes can be seen as cute whether the people involved are disabled or not, sure. And the relationship that you see on screen between them, it never does get particularly graphic or intimate. So I suppose it is pretty innocent. Apparently K-dramas tend to be a bit more restrained and contain fewer adult scenes. So it's not necessarily that they're avoiding this because Woo is autistic. Regardless, it's nice to see an autistic person falling in love. I was gonna go Beluga Whale for my next point. He feels so small in comparison. I want the dolphin back. He's not sufficient. There's not enough whale. Are beluga whales actually whales? Bet it's gonna turn out beluga whales are dolphins. Beluga whales are actually sharks. That's what it'll end up being. So another trait that's shared by Extraordinary Attorney Woo and Music by Sia is that both contain autistic characters played by non-autistic actors who didn't really want to take on the role, who were pretty reluctant. According to Sia, Maddie Ziegler actually cried during rehearsals because she was worried that people were going to think she was making fun of them with her mannerisms.
And Maddie arrived and she was living across the road from me at the time. I could see something was wrong with her. She was pale and she was just unlike herself. And I was like, honey, what's wrong? And she just burst into tears and she just said, I don't want anyone to think that I'm making fun of them.
And sadly, this instinct did turn out to be sort of correct. Maddie was only 14 at the time of recording though, and I think that actors can only be blamed for so much. The writing has a lot to answer for. I don't personally have any negative feelings towards Maddie at all. Sia actually refused to make the movie if Maddie didn't take on the role, so there was quite a bit of pressure there, and again, she was 14. But similarly, Park Eun-bin, who plays Woo, actually refused the role several times apparently. But the director said he had no other candidates in mind. The role is not an easy one. If Park Eun-bin turned down the role, I thought that this project would be too difficult without her. So I had to wait, and I did wait. And so he did. Director Yoon Shik waited for her to finish another project. And luckily for him, Park Eun-bin changed her mind out of trust for the writer and director. On accepting a Grand Prize for TV award for her portrayal of Woo, she said, "To tell you the truth, it took me a long time to accept this role. This was because I knew that depending on how I portray the character, depending on how I approach this character, there were real people in this world who might get hurt. So I was afraid of that." And she also spoke about how she had to override her preconceived ideas about what it meant to be autistic. It's so interesting because Park Eun-bin's approach to playing Woo feels like almost the exact opposite to Sia's approach to creating music. I thought I should make my own version of young Woo, so no one would feel unpleasant and offended. I decided not to imitate a real person or character that already exists. I referred to books and played my role in my own way. There is a diagnostic criteria that doctors use, so I imagined them and acted them out. I wouldn't say that I practiced any of her way of walking or bodily gestures, but they came up naturally as I immersed myself into the character. Which may sound a bit counterintuitive. I think many of us would say if you want to play an autistic person, you should speak to autistic people, spend time with autistic people, consult autistic people. And I don't think that's necessarily bad advice, but she wanted Woo to be unique. And we always say, you know, if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. The fact that she decided not to be influenced by anyone's specific mannerisms or presentation, that really seems to have paid off in this case. As I say, it honestly seems like Sia did the complete opposite when it came to creating music. To prepare for the role, Sia apparently had Maddie watch the 1993 movie What's Eating Gilbert Grape and the 1988 movie Rain Man. Sia's intention was actually for music to be Rain Man the musical.
I wanted to make it like the old movies, you know, that like Forrest Gump and Rain Man, and you know, I short described this movie as Rain Man the musical.
Sia has also said that she based the character on her friend's autistic son.
Your character is based on a real person that I know, and I'm teaching you all of his utterances and all of his tics, and as accurate a representation as that I know.
실존 인물이라든지 어떤 다른 캐릭터들을 모방할 생각은 애초에 접어두고
Literally the opposite. Again, I don't want to be too harsh on Maddie Ziegler with this comparison. Park Eun-bin was literally twice her age at the time of recording and has been acting since she was a child, is a lot more experienced. I don't know, we probably need a bigger sample size, but it's interesting to see the results of these two very different approaches. I think basically autistic people are sick of how Hollywood portrays us, and emulating movies that are 37 years old is not a good idea. I think Park Eun-bin was definitely doing something right here, and her careful approach paid off. I mean, somebody who has a very different presentation to Woo, basically, I'm not a genius and I mask more. I can't even name that many types of snake anymore. I still found her relatable, and she also reminded me of many other autistic people in my life. Oddly, the thing that I found most relatable about her was the thing that I think people found most offensive about music, aside from, you know, lethal restraint scenes that Sia promised were going to be removed and then were never removed from the movie. But I just loved Woo's mannerisms. I talk quite a lot about the fact that I have a dyspraxia diagnosis as well, as many other autistic people do. My movements can often be a bit strange, and it's something that I felt a lot of pressure to mask throughout my life. I often have an internal monologue of like, walk like a human, lift your hand like a human, pick that thing up like a human. How would a human move? Seeing Woo awkwardly hold her files, accidentally knock things over, fall over herself, still need somebody else to open her water bottle for her as an adult, and of course struggle with the infamous revolving doors. The way each movement feels like it takes a bit more effort and is very deliberate, but then also manages to be sort of graceful and bouncy at the same time. But that all really resonated with me, especially when her movement difficulties made her seem incompetent or slow to other characters, even though it doesn't actually have any major effect on her ability to do her job other than knocking over the odd file. Unfortunately, often people look at us and see weaknesses in one area and assume weaknesses in all areas. Obviously, it being relatable to me personally, it's not the be-all and end-all, but I don't think I was alone in feeling this way. I watched the first episode around the time that the show was released, and I quickly googled whether the actor was actually autistic, so I must have found it pretty convincing, otherwise I wouldn't have bothered. I did mention in my Wicked video that I was a little disappointed to learn that she wasn't at the time. Just would have been nice if she was. A little self-esteem boost for the autistics, you know, as a treat. Some people do act like having autistic people playing autistic roles just doesn't matter at all. That's the point of acting, it's just pretending. And I don't agree with that. While I don't think it's impossible for a non-autistic actor to do a great job and authentically play an autistic character, and also an autistic person playing an autistic character doesn't mean that it's automatically going to be amazing representation. I do think that having autistic actors in autistic roles is a great thing. For one thing, you're giving a real autistic person who, unlike their character, you know, actually exists, you're giving them a job. Those can be quite difficult for us to get sometimes. And this is even more true for disabilities that have a more obvious physical difference. For example, if an actor is a wheelchair user, there might not be that many non-disabled roles available to them, whereas the non-disabled actor has the option of playing the wheelchair user or the abundance of non-disabled roles out there. Plus, I do think it can make the portrayal a bit more authentic. Chloe Hayden's meltdown scene in Heartbreak High comes to mind. It can be a win-win for everybody involved, but I don't think that criticism really applies here. Which brings me on to my next point. Let's switch whales. I think it's finally Humpback's turn, but I think Attorney Wu is given more grace because autism is so stigmatized in South Korea. I couldn't actually find any evidence of openly autistic Korean actors. Now, I don't want to be patronizing here. I'm not trying to say that autism isn't stigmatized in the UK or US. If that weren't the case, this channel probably wouldn't exist. There was actually talk of a US adaptation of Extraordinary Attorney Wu at one stage. I'm not sure I'd be super confident that that representation would be equivalent or better. I'm not even sure I'd feel that confident that they would have picked an autistic actor for the role. But I do think countries like the UK, US, and Australia have less of an excuse for not hiring autistic actors at this point. And I do think in the case of Extraordinary Attorney Wu, where there were very likely no openly autistic actors available, hiring a neurotypical actor who treated the role with obvious care, respect, and maturity was almost certainly the next best thing to do. And of course, I'd rather that than what I consider quite positive representation not existing at all, and not having this opportunity to break down stigma worldwide really, but especially in South Korea, because I think it is fair to say there is quite a lot of stigma in South Korea. The National Human Rights Commission says that disabled people have been denied employment opportunities, refused insurance coverage, and prevented from taking exams with fellow students, and that more than half of those interviewed for jobs are asked whether their disability will hinder their performance. And it sounds like Woo Young-woo's initial struggle to be hired as a lawyer, despite her skill level, is sadly quite realistic. Many companies do not want to hire them, and therefore most autistic people could not earn enough money to live well in Korean society. And according to this 2018 study, some South Korean adults had an unwillingness to associate with autistic people, ADHDers, and people with Tourette's syndrome. And approximately 30 to 50% did not want to or want their children to work, study with, or befriend such people. And you can see here by looking at this table that participants really didn't want their family members to marry an autistic person. A subject that is kind of approached in Attorney Wu on the Jeju Island episodes. So I don't know, I think the fact that a fifth of televisions in South Korea tuned in to Extraordinary Attorney Wu is a really great step forward. It's hard to not see that as a success. As I say, I think it would be difficult to come away from that show not liking Woo Young-woo. And given this context about the stigma around marriage, great that we have millions of views on this kiss, and also Woo Young-woo looking lovely in a wedding dress. That's not a spoiler, don't worry. So I don't know, despite me being slightly disappointed to realize that she wasn't one of us, I think it would be a little silly for me to fixate on the fact that Park Eun-bin is not autistic. Okay, whale switch time. I think I'm gonna go with the dolphin. I might go with this one. It matches my outfit. Camouflage. I think it says on the bottom what this is supposed to be. Indo-Pacific Humpback Dolphin. Is it really this pink? I would Google it, but I don't always like to see underwater stuff. It freaks me out. Now, of course, something can be a positive step forward for autistic representation without being perfect. So I'll touch on a few things that I and other members of the autistic community didn't love so much. Firstly, we're doing this savant, autistic, genius, photographic memory thing again here, yet again, and we were doing it again in Patience. Ooh. Now, to some extent, I get it because TV shows, movies, we often do focus on people who are exceptional, you know, to keep it interesting. We don't want to watch people take their bins out or whatever. We want to see them doing interesting stuff, okay. But surely not every autistic character needs to be a genius in order to earn their screen time. It's not the case for neurotypical characters. They don't have to have superpowers. Why do we? One day, could they allow us to have a more average autistic person? Surely autistic people can be interesting without a photographic memory. I think a lot of us are interesting, and most of us don't have a photographic memory. 90% of autistic people are not savants, and yet it's so overrepresented. I have heard some people argue that Woo Young-woo is not a savant, I disagree. I've seen those graphics that pop up when she's trying to think of a specific passage of law. It's giving The Good Doctor, which actually also originally was a Korean show. I don't know. Again, I'll give it some grace because maybe it is more realistic in this case that Woo Young-woo would only be hired by this law firm if she could demonstrate some exceptional abilities, and obviously autistic savants do exist. And also, I think I'll give it a bit more grace because it's a woman, and yeah, maybe we just need to cycle through all of the stereotypes with women for a while. Better than nothing, I suppose. I also have some concerns about episode 3. I think it's one that a lot of people have mixed feelings about. I worry that they may have portrayed the autistic spectrum, as so many people already see it, as just these two black and white extremes. In episode 3, basically Woo Young-woo has to represent an autistic man who I assume has an intellectual disability, he's high support needs, and he has been accused of killing his brother during a meltdown, basically. You can maybe already see how that episode premise could be a bit of a recipe for disaster. But the purpose of the episode is to highlight the discrimination that autistic people face in society, and also to try and highlight the diversity of the spectrum. As I say though, I do worry that the audience is going to come away with this black and white idea of the two ends of the spectrum, the two extremes. I also think some of the choices for the higher support needs representation were a bit questionable. For example, before this character enters the room, you hear these thundering footsteps like you're watching Jurassic Park or something. Supposed to kind of make the audience nervous and build up the anticipation. What sort of monster is about to walk through the door, you know? But I think the purpose of this is to highlight how people often are afraid of disabled people, and to juxtapose that fear and anticipation with who this character actually is, a guy with a special interest that's typically aimed at children, Peng Su. I think you could argue that this interest in Peng Su is infantilizing, but some autistic people do have special interests in things that are typically aimed at children, and that's obviously no excuse for infantilization. These people should still be treated as adults. I've made plenty of content about that in the past. However, as autism is so often seen as a children's disorder, maybe it wasn't the best choice for a fictional character. We kind of want to discourage the general public from seeing people with intellectual disabilities as children. However, there is a point in the show, which I did appreciate, where this character showed a lot of agency. They took a taxi without their parents' knowledge to go and meet with Woo Young-woo and to communicate about the case on their own. I thought that was a great inclusion. As I say, I think a non-autistic person playing a higher support needs character always has more of a risk of falling into that mockery territory. It's hard for me personally to definitively say that this wasn't relatable or it wasn't a realistic portrayal of autism as a lower support needs autistic person. We're all so different. Whether something is relatable to me personally or not, it's probably not a great benchmark. And I do think some criticisms of autism representation do feel a bit like, well, this person wasn't like me and did things that I don't do, so I don't like it. I have been wondering if sometimes our discomfort when we see higher support needs representation is whether that's always because the portrayal is bad, or whether sometimes there's a bit of internalized ableism. Maybe it's a bit of both sometimes. You know, perhaps sometimes not wanting to be associated with the traits that are so often mocked by bullies. In episode 3, they did actually touch on Hans Asperger's and how autistic people were treated under the Nazis. It was quite emotional, actually. I didn't expect them to mention it. Clearly, they'd done their research there. I also loved how in this episode, Woo Young-woo asserted that all autistic people are different. When her colleagues heard that they'd be representing an autistic person, they kind of acted like, ooh, you'll be able to read his mind. You'll be able to communicate in a special autism language or something like that. She made it clear that it wasn't the case, and she had to work hard to be able to communicate with this client. Where's my dolphin gone? Oh, I've just realized that I abandoned my dolphin. Another thing that I didn't like so much about episode 3 was there's just this weird moment where it seems like Woo Young-woo is going to unalive herself, but then you're not sure if she was just trying to investigate something for the case, and it's never really clarified what was actually going on. It wasn't clear what mental state she was in that moment. I don't know, it just felt like something that maybe shouldn't have been taken so lightly and needed a bit more explanation. We've not done Blue Whale yet. This is obviously true to scale. Okay, so I said I would talk about season 2. From what I can tell, I think at this stage, we're not sure if it's happening. It might not be happening. Park Eun-bin actually has 2 shows coming up. Hyperknife on Disney Plus is set for a March release, and she'll be filming The Wonderfuls, a superhero K-drama that's going to be coming to Netflix until May this year. So she's clearly still wrapped up in other projects, at least until summer. It sounds like she was actually pretty tired after the last season and found the process lonely, if the translation is correct there. Kang Tae-oh, who plays her love interest, he enlisted for military service after recording Extraordinary Attorney Woo, but he actually finished that last year, and next week his new K-drama is actually gracing Netflix, and it is called The Potato Lab. I want to watch that so badly. But although she was contracted for another season, writer Moon Ji-won seems to be focusing on another project called Deaf Voices. It's a movie. It's actually her directorial debut as well. So yeah, she sounds pretty busy, pretty preoccupied as well. It is pretty common for K-dramas to just have one season. It did have a relatively neat ending, I guess. There definitely were some loose threads that I would have liked to explore for sure. I don't know, I personally would love there to be a second season if they ever got around to it and if everyone was feeling up to it. Either way, no matter what happens there, I definitely recommend the first season. It can be a bit melodramatic at times. I just found it really cozy and nice and relaxing to watch. Just, I don't know, there's a lot of horrible stuff going on in the world. There was some really lovely cinematography and just wonderful CGI of whales. It's really pretty sometimes. It's really visually pleasing. The intro as well, I think, is also quite stimmy. I don't know if they deliberately made it with autistic people in mind, but there's lots of little things that she does that are quite satisfying. Like this little bit with a keyring and stuff like that. I don't know, it's pleasing to watch and the music is nice. Maybe give it a go. I don't know. Anyway, if you want my thoughts on some representation that I liked less, then you might enjoy my video that I made about Patience, which is over on Patreon. Patience does actually star an autistic person, Ella Maisie Purvis. She's actually played 2 autistic characters, which is super cool. I am really, really pleased about that. If you want to stay on the main channel, I have a video about music by See It, and then I also have a follow-up video about this interview that she did reflecting on music a couple of years later. It was like this paywalled interview with Zane Lowe. Yeah, some interesting insights came out from that. I also made another reaction to Fake Disorder Cringe recently, in which they posted about me. It's me. It's me. Oh my god, it's Meg's channel made it onto Fake Disorder Cringe. I feel nervous. Why do I feel nervous? And if you do join the Patreon, you can watch the Patience review. There's also like 20 other exclusive videos, lots of podcast episodes, outtakes, and you can join the Discord server so you can chat to other autistic or otherwise neurodivergent or just nice people. You don't have to be diagnosed, you don't have to show your diagnosis to get in the door. As long as you're nice, you can join. It's a lovely, lovely space. I think we'll be playing Fall Guys again soon. Sometimes we play Fall Guys. I'll put the date on screen. Anyway, phew, I can't believe I got to the end of this. I'm just surrounded by whales. I'm exhausted. It's been a long one. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in my next video very, very soon. Thank you for your lovely reactions to the video that I posted last week, the update video. I really, really appreciate it. I'll keep you updated on what's going on, I promise. Okay, bye-bye.